Hello there, everybody. I hope that your Wednesday's off to a good start. I did have to pre-record this, so it is actually Tuesday evening when I record this, but you'll be watching Wednesday morning, and I hope that your Wednesday is off to a good start. So with today, we get to the back of the book. And we began several months ago with the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And today, we get to the back of the book. Having gone all the way through the Old Testament and now the New Testament, we get to the back of the book. Revelation, I did save that for 1 week by itself, simply because this book is so very different from any other in the scriptures. It's one that I have particular interest in. I guess it may be the one that I know the most about, even though I do not remotely claim to understand everything in it, or even most of it. I wrote this a little commentary, if you will, on Revelation a year or so back, and you can pick that up on Amazon, Impending Doom or Incredible Promise. So if you want to read a lot more along the lines of what I'll say over the next few minutes, pick up a copy of it. So, with Revelation, this is the end of the canon. It was actually one of the last books to be accepted into the canon. It was fairly late getting acceptance, being recognized as authoritative, inspired, canonical. So, yes, the bare nuts and bolts about the book. There is a very strong early church tradition that it was written by the aged Apostle John in the early to mid 90s AD during the reign of the Emperor Domitian. That's the strong early church tradition. That is, and there's no guarantee that that is actually true. You can find some who would argue that the book is written, say, 25 or 30 years earlier, in the mid-60s, during the reign of the Emperor Nero. And there are some who doubt that it was the Apostle John who wrote it. The book claims to be written by John, but it is possible that it was another John who is well known in the early church instead of the Apostle. Who knows? For my money, I'm just going to assume that it was the Apostle, but at this point we can't know for certain. And so when we get to this book, right off the bat, how do we read it? I'm going to give you several bullet point things about how to read it. Primarily, we read it with humility. This is it's a type of writing, type of literature, which is really different than anything else in the canon. So to give you several bullet point things, when you read it, always think first, what is the message to the original readers, to the original hearers? Trying to interpret Revelation through the lens of the newspaper or the most recent story you read on your internet news feed is a surefire way to miss it, to misinterpret it. Next, don't look in Revelation for a chronological blueprint or chronological timeline of the future. That is, again, a 100% surefire way to miss it. Always take this writing very seriously, but you don't have to take it all literally. Something can be very serious and be true without being literal. So to give you an example, if somebody refers to a linebacker in football as being a monster, that guy isn't literally a monster, but we know what is meant by the allusion there. Pay attention when John identifies an image. And he identifies lampstands and several other things in the book of Revelation, and pay attention when you're reading it. Pay attention when John actually identifies what an image represents. Pay attention to the Old Testament. Like roughly three quarters of every verse in Revelation has some reference, some allusion to the Old Testament. John never quotes directly from the Old Testament, but the whole book is just dripping with Old Testament language, Old Testament symbolism. In particular, he seems to be really impacted, really influenced by Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, just to name a few. Focus on the big picture, on the main picture more than the details. I mentioned the audience. Like when you read this, you got to be thinking about who John is writing to. He's writing to 7 churches that are facing persecution, that are under intense pressure to worship the emperor, to bow down to the imperial cult. That's who John is writing to. So when you read this, what does this mean to them? And then secondarily, how do I apply it to my own life, to our current context? And I do think that the biggest mistake people make in reading Revelation is trying to read it like it is purely an outline of future events. It's not. It's not. So like I said, what did it mean to the original readers? What would it have meant to first century Christians in Ephesus or Thyatira or Pergamum, Laodicea? And then from that, how does it connect to now, to the here and now? Several other things to mention about the book. Structurally, it is composed of a series of primarily it is structured around 3 series of 7s. So you have an opening vision in chapter 1. John is in a cave on the Isle of Patmos, and he has an opening vision of the risen Christ, and Christ gives him letters to 7 different churches, which take up chapters 2 and 3. And from that we get to 3 successive series of 7s. 7 seals. And the 7th seal we find out is just another series of 7s, that being 7 trumpets. And the 7th trumpet is, in actuality, yet another series of 7s, that being 7 bowls. The 7th one of each opens up the next one, and the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls are the structure for most of the book. Also, when you read Revelation, you can pay attention to this. That John likes to repeat himself, and there's nothing wrong with that. How many of us, in trying to teach our kids something, don't just tell them once, but tell them several times? You don't just tell your kid, don't put your hand on the stovetop only once. You don't tell them just one time not to play in the road. That's something you tell them over and over again. So there are some things that John will repeat numerous times. And at the end of chapter 11, if the book ended right there and you didn't know the second half existed, you could be pretty satisfied. But you're only halfway through. Numerous times, John describes the gathering of all the wicked for God to smite them. John describes several different times from chapter 16 onward the gathering of all of the unfaithful for judgment. It happens first in chapter 16 with the famous reference to Armageddon. But numerous times, it's like John is trying to make certain we get it. Okay, the unfaithful, the unjust, the wicked will be judged. Other interpretive issues. Numbers mean things. Numbers mean things in the ancient world that they don't mean now. Now 3 is just 1 less than 4. 4 is just 1 less than 5, etc. I guess the closest thing to something that means something now in any sense is number 7, we consider to be a lucky number. So back then, 3, 4, 6, 10, 12 are all important numbers. The most important of those numbers, the most important number, however, for Revelation is 7. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. There are 7 thunders. And if you dig a little bit deeper, there are over and over again 7s in the book of Revelation. And 7 is a perfect number. So if you have, as to illustrate, 7 horns, refers to omnipotence. A horn is a symbol of strength and power. So 7 horns is omnipotence. Eyes. The Lamb with 7 eyes. Eyes symbolic of knowledge, of seeing. So 7 eyes implies omniscience. One more thing for you to look for when you read through the book of Revelation is look for a pattern. You've got a clear pattern in Revelation, which to my mind has to be intentional. Either by the part of John who writes it in how he records this, or in the mind of God in inspiring it. But there is a clear pattern here. You have a vision of heavenly worship of some sort, followed by all sorts of calamities on the earth. Another vision of heavenly worship and bliss, followed by disaster and hell on earth. Followed by, you guessed it, worship in heaven, the saints in white, etc., followed by hell on earth. So chapter 5, last several verses of chapter 5, we have a threefold scene of heavenly worship. Incredible, powerful stuff. And that leads to the opening of the 7 seals in chapter 6, which is awful stuff. These seals, opening the seals, that's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse kind of stuff. And then from that you get another scene of beatific heavenly worship, followed by the trumpet judgments, which leads to the worship of the elders in chapter 11, followed by, in chapters 12 and 13, the dragon chase, the really bizarre scene where this hideous red dragon chases a pregnant woman through the desert as she's trying to give birth. And that is followed immediately by a vision of the Lamb on Mount Zion. And then from the vision of the Lamb on Mount Zion, you get the wrath of God at the end of chapter 14, which leads us to this incredible vision in chapter 15 of the saints in white singing a new song, the Song of Moses. Over and over again, heavenly worship followed by hell on earth and destruction and disaster, which I think has to be intentional to symbolize that whatever disasters, whatever calamities these original churches are suffering through, whatever they're suffering through, it is not permanent. Or you could phrase it another way, that in the midst of all they are going through, that there are periodic reminders that God is in control of this, that it is the Lord Jesus Christ who ultimately reigns, and because you are faithful to him, you will reign with him. So, one last thought I'll leave you with. An awful lot of people, when they read Revelation, read it and they come away scared to death. Some people don't read it simply because they are scared of it. If you read Revelation and you come away scared, you have missed the point. If you read Revelation and you come away scared, you have missed it. You have missed it altogether. The whole point of the book is to inspire comfort and courage in first century Christians who are suffering far more than any of us in the United States could ever dream of. They're suffering far more than any of us in the U.S. right now could dream of. And this is written to give them courage and to give them comfort and confidence. And if we read this and we come away scared and frightened, we have totally missed it. This is a book that is written to inspire courage and comfort and confidence in knowing that governments, whether they be first century Roman emperors, or governments in any nation, presidents and premiers, dictators, etc., all of them are temporary. And all of them ultimately bow before the far greater power, which and who is Jesus Christ himself. And Genesis gives us this wonderful, beautiful picture of an idyllic garden, particularly in Genesis chapter 2, before the fall. How does Revelation end? Revelation ends with a wonderful, idyllic garden, with a tree, with a river of life flowing through the middle of it. The trees on either side of the river of life, with the 12 kinds of fruit for the healing of the nations. And that is the earth. So Revelation ends with a renewed and restored earth. And the saints of God dwelling on that, walking with God and knowing God far better than any of us right now could imagine. That is some powerful good news. So with that, I hope the rest of your Wednesday is great.